When I learned the story behind this seemingly normal photo, it scared the absolute out of me. It shows a couple of tourists hunkered down in their hotel room after a day of exploring Yosemite National Park. Roughly 20 minutes after this photo was taken, they got a knock on their hotel room door. Within just a few days, one of the largest searches in Yosemite history was underway, trying to find the women in this photo as well as the one who took it. And tragically, the search didn't last more than just a few weeks before everyone's worst fears were confirmed true. Carol Sund, Julie Sund, and Sylvania Peloso were all found dead, and none of the 3 deaths had been an accident. Fear quickly spread that a killer could be roaming throughout Yosemite National Park, and yet at the very same time, the police shifted their attention away from the national park and down into the Central Valley. They zeroed in on who they thought were the perpetrators of these killings, but unfortunately, the police were completely wrong. The true killer was still, in fact, up in the mountains, struggling to fight off his deranged urge to claim more victims. And then, right after the FBI announced that they had jailed the perpetrators, this true killer would lose his fight, and he would once again turn Yosemite National Park into a murder scene. This is the story of the most dangerous man in national park history. Yosemite National Park is one of the most popular and most beautiful national parks in all of the United States. Located in the heart of the Sierra Nevada mountains, it's home to the famous Half Dome, as well as 70 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail, the northern terminus of the John Muir Trail, and so much more. And so with all that said, I invite you to come with me on a virtual trip to Yosemite. We're gonna go right now, and by the way, this trip costs you nothing except you can hit that subscribe button to cover admission if you're a repeat viewer, and if this is your first time watching my channel, you can cover your admission by leaving a comment below and telling me how you like this video and what you think of this story. Yosemite's natural beauty attracts visitors from all over the US and from the world for that matter. It's not the type of place where acts of violence and evil are supposed to happen. In February of 1999, 42-year-old Carol Sund, her 15-year-old daughter Julie, and 16-year-old Sylvina Peloso took a trip to Yosemite National Park. And because of the cold weather that time of year, they opted not to camp or to stay outside overnight, and they instead booked a room at the Cedar Lodge in El Portal, California, which is located just outside of the national park boundary. My understanding is that El Portal is essentially a gateway community for the national park. The Suns and Peloso had flown into San Francisco and then rented a red Pontiac Grand Prix for the drive up into the mountains. On February 15th, the group spent the day sightseeing around the park, probably enjoying the lack of crowds relative to the summer anyways. They marveled in the beauty of Half Dome, they visited some of the other sites in the area, and they even spent some time in Yosemite Valley ice skating and just overall enjoying their time as tourists. After an exhausting day of sightseeing, they returned to the Cedar Lodge. They ate dinner at the restaurant there, and they then rented a few movies from the front desk of the hotel. Once they walked out of the lobby with these movies, they were never seen alive ever again. As you can probably tell by now, I'm about to cover some very disturbing details, and it's for that reason that I'd like to lighten up the mood for just a second here and tell you about Rocket Money. That's right, Rocket Money is today's sponsor. Have you guys noticed how it seems like every single online service is a paid subscription nowadays? It's so easy to sign up for one of these paid subscriptions and then completely forget about it, and then meanwhile that money is being sucked out of your bank account every single month. So this is where Rocket Money comes in. Rocket Money is an all-in-one personal finance app that helps you save money and spend less. And one of the ways that they do this is by making it easy for you to cancel unwanted subscriptions. So like over a year ago, I signed up for this online game. I played it like twice and then I completely forgot about it. But despite despite the fact that I forgot about it. They had been charging me every single month up until literally last month when I finally signed up for Rocket Money. Rocket Money identified this subscription for me, and I was like, oh wow, I totally forgot about this. And Rocket Money also allowed me to cancel it with just a few taps right inside the app. And by the way, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what Rocket Money can do for you. It can help you make budgets, it can help you lower your bills, and it's just gonna help you manage your money better overall. So with that said, head over to rocketmoney.com/KyleHatesHiking or just click the link in the description. You'll be able to get started for free when you do that, and you'll also be joining over 5 million members who are already using Rocket Money. And when you click that link, you'll also be doing this channel a massive favor, by the way. So one more time, rocketmoney.com/KyleHatesHiking. Go take control of your finances. And with that said, let's get back to the story. The Sons and Peloso were supposed to check out of the Cedar Lodge on the morning of February 16th. Their hotel key had been left in the room, and their red Pontiac Grand Prix rental car was no longer in the parking lot. It seemed as though the three women had left as planned, but they never showed up at the airport. Carol Son's husband was supposed to pick them up there, and at first he assumed that they had made alternate plans. But then another day passed by and he still wasn't able to make contact with them. A check with their rental car company revealed that the Pontiac had never been returned to the lot. Clearly, something had gone wrong. And so it's at this point that Carol Sund, Julie Sund, and Silvina Peloso were reported missing, and a search within Yosemite National Park was launched. It was initially assumed that the women either got lost while they were hiking or even that they drove off a cliff somewhere. But then, while the police were in the middle of investigating these theories, they were thrown a disturbing curveball. Carol Sund's wallet was found on the streets of Modesto, California, some 100 miles away from the Cedar Lodge. And even more disturbingly, the wallet still contained all of Sund's cards and cash. That made it seem like robbery wasn't a motive in the disappearance, and it just wasn't a good sign. However, despite the disturbing nature of this find, it did initially seem like a promising clue. But then, weeks went by without any further information about the fate of the missing women. Weeks turned into a full month, and then, on March 18th, 1999, a hiker accidentally stumbled upon an absolutely horrifying scene that was tied to this case. The hiker was just off of California Highway 108 near Long Barn, California. He was walking along some seldom used logging roads, and when he was roughly 100 yards away from Highway 108, he came upon a burnt out red Pontiac Grand Prix. He reported the findings to the police, and when investigators arrived on scene the following day, they discovered that the license plate number of this burnt out car matched the plate number of the missing rental car. And then, when they opened the trunk, everybody's worst fears were confirmed true. Inside the trunk, investigators found the burnt bodies of Carol Sund and Silvina Peloso. The only way that they were even able to confirm the identities of the women was through dental records and DNA, which should tell you a lot. Missing, however, from the gruesome scene was the body of the third victim, Julie Sund, which was a mystery that would only last for a few more days. At this point, there was little doubt that the three women had, obviously been met with foul play, but just in case the FBI needed even more assurance of this, I guess, on March 25th, an anonymous tip was received which led investigators to their final body, that of Julie Sund. Her body was discovered in the brush by an overlook at the Don Pedro Reservoir in Moccasin, California. And just like her mother and her friend, she too had been met with a extremely violent end. The three murders sent shockwaves through the communities that surrounded Yosemite National Park, and a lot of pressure was put on the FBI to arrest whoever was responsible and to do it fast. This is exactly what the FBI did over the next few weeks. A number of repeat criminals from the Modesto area were arrested, and they were also questioned extensively. At one point, the FBI even claimed that they had forensic evidence linking two suspects to the murders, as well as self-incriminating information that was given by one of them. And if I seem a little confused while I'm telling you this, you're going to understand why very shortly. In June of 1999, roughly 3 months after the bodies were discovered, FBI agent in charge James Maddox said, quote, "I do feel we have all of the main players in jail, but we are in no rush to charge them." Tuolumne County District Attorney Nina Dean agreed, and they stuck to their word, because over a month went by and still no charges had been filed. But if the FBI and the county's top prosecutor said that the murder suspects were in custody, isn't that enough assurance that Yosemite National Park was in fact safe and it was free from a roaming killer? I think this is probably how a lot of people felt at the time, even if the suspects hadn't been charged or tried yet. Well, unfortunately, the FBI was dead wrong. There was still a killer roaming throughout Yosemite National Park. During the investigation into the murders of the Sons and Peloso, this madman was just waiting around to get caught and fighting his urge to kill again the entire time. And eventually, this is a fight that he would end up losing. In 1999, 26-year-old Joey Armstrong was working at the Yosemite Institute as a naturalist. She was living with her boyfriend and a few other roommates in the small community of Foresta, California, which sits inside the borders of Yosemite National Park. And from my understanding, it's a small collection of park employee housing and maybe a few vacation rentals. In mid-July of 1999, Armstrong had been planning to take a road trip out of the park to go visit with some friends for a few days. Her boyfriend and her other roommates were actually planning on going too, and they had already left. But Armstrong had to work on July 21st, and therefore she stayed behind for a little bit extra, and she was planning on leaving on the 22nd. And yet, despite these plans, Joey Armstrong never left Yosemite National Park. Her friends became worried when she didn't show up as expected, and with the murders that had occurred a few months earlier in mind, they decided to report her missing. Searchers quickly traveled to Foresta, and what they found would solidify the story of the Yosemite murders into national park history and American history forever. When they arrived at Armstrong's green cabin, they found her pickup parked in the driveway just as you would expect. Inside of the truck were the belongings that she had packed for her planned road trip, a road trip which obviously never happened. Searchers kind of fanned out and began searching the wilderness that surrounded the remote cabin, and eventually one group of them spotted some footprints that led off into the woods. These footprints kind of made it look like there had been a chase on foot. I mean, not a good sign. They followed these footprints for a little bit until they finally reached a shallow ditch filled with water. Just a warning, this next part is very disturbing. When they looked inside of the ditch, they found the decapitated body of Joey Armstrong. As soon as the word got out about Armstrong's murder, yet another massive wave of fear spread throughout Yosemite National Park and the surrounding communities. The two murder scenes were very different from each other. The first one was well planned and hidden, and the other one, Armstrong's murder, was extremely blatant. But just the fact that there had been two separate killings within a few months committed inside the national park was just so rare that pretty much everybody started to assume that the two killings were connected. And as history would show, this assumption was correct. And unlike the killings committed back in March, after Armstrong's murder, the police would quickly zero in on the actual real suspect. On the night of July 21st, the same night that Armstrong was killed, a park employee had noticed an unusual vehicle parked near her residence. Because this area was so remote and seldom traveled, It's not surprising to me that any unfamiliar vehicles that drove into the area would probably stand out and be noticed. The particular vehicle in question was a blue and white International Harvester Scout, and since this was the most obvious clue that the police had to go on, they wasted no time scouring the nearby roads in search of this vehicle. And this effort would pay off, because on the very same day that Armstrong's body was found, this is July 22nd, police noticed a matching vehicle parked on the side of California Highway 140, only about a 20-minute drive from the park's boundary. The police followed a short, unmarked trail down to the Merced River, where they found a man in his 30s, all by himself, smoking a joint and sunbathing naked. This man told the investigators that his name was Cary Stayner and that he was an employee at the Cedar Lodge, which was the very same hotel that the Sons and Peloso had been staying at the night that they were killed. Stayner's initial encounter with law enforcement was fairly brief, but before the police left, they took some photos of Stayner's tires. His tire treads were quickly matched to some tire tracks that were found at the scene of Armstrong's murder, and within 2 days, Stayner was arrested. I feel like most of the time when a criminal is arrested, maybe I've just watched too much Cops or whatever, but they usually lie and like make up a story which tries to make them sound innocent, or if they're smart, they won't even do that. They'll just shut up and get a lawyer and let the lawyer do the talking on their behalf. I feel like it's usually only after hours or even days of pressure and like hard interrogation that the criminal finally confesses to their crime. But Cary Stayner, for whatever reason, didn't lie at all, and he didn't even wait for the interrogation to begin before he started talking. While he was being driven to his police interview, Stayner openly confessed to murdering Joey Armstrong. And he didn't stop there, by the way. In a shocking turn of events, Stayner also confessed to killing Carol Sund, Julie Sund, and Sylvina Peloso. The FBI had been completely wrong about their initial list of suspects because Cary Stayner was, in fact, the Yosemite Park killer. The police finally had their man, but the story doesn't end here. In fact, it's actually far from over, because the more that investigators and the public learned about Stayner, the more bizarre and disturbing the circumstances surrounding the murders became. First of all, because Stayner lived and worked at the very same hotel where the first round of murders occurred, he had actually been interviewed by investigators before, twice actually. That's my understanding anyways. However, it appears to me that he was never really considered a suspect at this point. He was mostly just being interviewed because he worked there and it was just kind of a matter of routine. I would suspect that every employee that was working or around the night of the murders was probably interviewed. However, the FBI would go on to receive a lot of backlash from the public for dismissing Stayner as a suspect in these initial interviews, as well as just the overall way that they handled the first 3 murders. I'm not going to get into that controversy right now, but if you're familiar with this story or you've researched this case, then please leave your respectful thoughts about this in the comments. One of the strangest things about this entire story is the circumstances of Cary Stayner's childhood and his adolescence. It would turn out that Stayner was no stranger to horrifying acts of crime, but not because he had a history of committing them, but rather because they had been committed against his family, more specifically his brother. The story of Stayner's brother is so disturbingly unique that his brother's name would eventually end up in all sorts of headlines and even have a television series made based on what he went through. In December of 1972, Cary Stayner's younger brother, Stephen, disappeared while walking home from school in his hometown of Merced, California. Stephen was only 7 years old at the time, and despite a tremendous effort by his friends and family, no sign of him turned up for literally years following his disappearance. And this obviously had a tremendous effect on the Stayner family, and I'm sure we can all imagine the impact that this would have had on the 11-year-old Cary Stayner at the time. Eventually, The Stayners made the difficult adjustment to a life without their youngest son, and Cary Stayner entered high school and eventually gained a reputation as a skilled artist, and more specifically, a cartoonist. And then, at the beginning of March in 1980, I mean, this is crazy, 8 years after Steven Stayner had gone missing, the Stayner family received some extremely shocking and also exciting news. I mean, this is the type of news that would make them incredibly happy, relieved, but also incredibly disturbed at the same time. The family learned that Steven Stayner was alive and he had just escaped from 8 years of absolute hell. It would turn out that Steven had been kidnapped by a deranged child predator named Kenneth Parnell, who would go on to repeatedly, the boy. Parnell began to falsely claim that Steven was his own son, even enrolling him in school under a false name. Eventually, Parnell became so comfortable with the situation that he would let Steven come and go unsupervised, and he would let him stay home alone for days at a time while Parnell traveled. Steven apparently had plenty of chances to escape, but he was too scared and probably confused to do so as such a young boy. However, Steven did eventually summon the courage to free himself. Parnell ended up kidnapping another young boy named Timothy White, and Steven witnessed the trauma that White was going through after getting kidnapped, and as the older of the two boys, Steven decided to take action. One night while Parnell was away working, the two boys simply up and left the house that they were being held captive in, and they hitchhiked their way to a police station. Parnell was arrested the next day, and practically overnight, Steven Stayner became a national celebrity. The news coverage of Steven's story was immense. Cameras followed him everywhere. He was repeatedly interviewed, and eventually a television series called I Know My First Name is Steven was produced about his story. And while all the attention and praise and cameras and all this was focused on his brother, Cary Stayner lurked in the background quietly. He felt left out, he felt jealous, and he felt forgotten. He would often escape to the mountains to smoke marijuana as a way for him to cope with this crazy situation and just cope with the fact that he really was feeling left out. Cary Stayner said, quote, "We," referring to him and his brother, "never really got along that well after he came back. All of a sudden, Steven was getting all these gifts, getting all this clothing, getting all this attention. I guess I was jealous. I'm sure I was. I was the oldest and all that. Then, all of a sudden, it's gone. I got put on the back burner, you might say." Though we can't say that Cary Stayner's gruesome crimes were like a direct result of the situation with his brother, obviously. I mean, I'm sure that the trauma and later the jealousy that he experienced in his youth played a role. Whether it's a really big role or a small role is up for debate, but I mean, it certainly played a role. We do know that Cary Stayner repeatedly told investigators and the media that he just felt this bizarre and twisted compulsion to kill, one that he tried to control until it finally just boiled over. He said that he had his first violent fantasy about killing women when he was only 7 years old, which is incredibly disturbing. And even more disturbing than that, if that's even possible, is that he also said that he would have continued to kill until he was locked up. So it's a damn good thing that he was caught before he was able to claim more victims. Cary Stayner told investigators that on February 15th, 1999, he noticed Carol Sund, Julie Sund, and Silvina Peloso arrive at the Cedar Lodge, which is where Stayner was not just working, but actually living as well at the time. Around 10:30 p.m., the woman took these photos inside their hotel room. About 30 minutes later, around 11, Stayner knocked on the hotel room door and told them that he needed to come in to fix a leak that was dripping through the ceiling. Carol Sund was initially skeptical, apparently, but she did eventually relent and she let Stayner in. And then shortly after this, he pulled out a gun. He held the women captive for some time, and then he eventually strangled and killed Carol Sund and Silvina Peloso. He then loaded their bodies into the trunk of their rental car, and then he forced Julie Sund into the passenger seat. He drove her to the Don Pedro Reservoir, where he eventually killed her too, and he left her body in the brush. Now, I'm sparing you a lot of the gruesome details here because I honestly can't say them out loud. It was awful. I could barely even read this stuff. I mean, it's just brutal. Next, Stayner drove the rental car to a remote spot off of California Highway 108. He left the car there, and then he walked a few miles back towards civilization, and eventually he took a cab back towards El Portal. He returned a few days later to burn the car, and then he also dropped Carol Sund's wallet in Modesto to try and throw off investigators. He also sent the anonymous letter tipping off authorities about where Julie Sund's body could be recovered. After apparently getting away with these horrific crimes, Stayner decided to kill again. He had been following the news coverage, and yeah, it really looked like he had gotten away with it, and he was kind of just waiting, expecting to be arrested, but that never happened. And so one day, he randomly drove up to Joey Armstrong, and this happened on the evening of July 21st, 1999. Stayner sensed an opportunity here, and this was truly a random, wrong place, wrong time type of thing. Stayner held Armstrong at gunpoint, and he actually bound her up inside her cabin before forcing her into his vehicle. However, Armstrong apparently was able to actually open the car door and throw herself out of the vehicle while it was moving before she took off running into the woods towards a nearby cabin. Stayner stopped the car and ran after her, and tragically, he did eventually catch up to her after about 100 yards of running through the woods, and when he caught her, Stayner killed her on the spot. Cary Stayner was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for killing Armstrong, and he was eventually sentenced to death for killing Carol Sund, Julie Sund, and Silvina Peloso. This death sentence was handed down in 2002, but as I speak today in 2024, Cary Stayner is actually still alive. The state of California hasn't executed a prisoner since 2006, and in 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom suspended the practice in the state. And because of these events, it's likely that Stayner will live the rest of his life behind bars and won't be executed. It should be noted that Cary Stayner freely admitted to the 4 murders that I've discussed in this video, but it's also suspected that he may have committed even more. Stayner's uncle, with whom he was living with at the time, was actually killed by a shotgun blast in 1990, and nobody has ever been held responsible for this. Patricia Hicks was also found dead in Yosemite National Park back in the early 80s, but wasn't identified until 2021. That story is very complicated. I think it's one that I plan on covering in a future video, so leave a comment if you want me to do that. For now, I'll just say that it's possible that Stayner committed this crime as well. There's been a few more murders in the area surrounding Yosemite that he is suspected of, but I gotta say he has denied involvement in any of these. Certainly doesn't mean he didn't do them, but he did admit to the other one so freely that I don't know. There's really no way of knowing right now. My give back call out for this video is the National Center for Victims of Crime, whose mission is to, quote, forge a national commitment to help victims of crime rebuild their lives. I'm not affiliated with this charity in any way. I just like to do these call outs at the end of my videos. And so I'll have a link to their website in the description. I've made a donation to them, and I encourage you to do so as well. Leave a comment and let me know if or how this story has affected your relationship with national parks. I'm really curious about this. I'm guessing that many of you have probably heard this story before the video, and so maybe you were already aware of it. I don't know. For myself, I think that this and other similar stories are an important reminder about how even though national parks and I guess other outdoor recreation areas for that matter, even though these places are significantly safer than literally any city, they're still not completely immune from crime. Again, it's extremely rare, and I personally choose not to let these stories deter me from getting outside and enjoying the mountains and stuff, but this crime and these stories do exist, and I don't think that we should hide from that fact either. Thank you for watching, and may Carol Sund, Julie Sund, Silvina Peloso, and Joey Armstrong rest in peace.